Hello! Welcome to my last video of the video series about Reverb and FMOD. This time we're actually going to talk about Wwise, which might seem a little confusing, but I basically wanted to point out how I expect Reverb to work in a middleware and then in a game engine, which is why we're gonna dive right into and make it a really short video. I've already prepared the Wwise project and as well basically reused the Unity project we had before and set up the link to the Wwise project already. In Wwise we have currently two sounds with corresponding events linked to them. I first want to point out that we would have sort of similar options in Wwise than in FMOD. We can set up auxiliary buses for different reverbs. So I'm gonna do so for reverb 1 and 2 and make one really large and the other one rather small. So now we could simply select one of those reverbs for our auxiliary sense, and with that would already those footsteps be in this reverb. So if I play them, I've selected the small one, but to make it more clear, that's the large one. This volume can then be automated by any parameter we'd like to link to it. So not gonna go in too much details, but there's different types of parameters inside of Wwise, which are basically states, switches, and RTPCs. RTPCs is like the most common one because it gives us a fluent value range. Just gonna name that ref for a quick demonstration. I could then link the auxiliary volume to the just created parameter, and this allows me to preview those values. So no reverb, big reverb. The thing is, this is probably not the way you want to do it in Wwise, so I'm going to remove that send again, as well as the automation, because Wwise gives us this opportunity of game-defined auxiliary sense, which basically means we can set up reverb zones inside of our game engine, and basically those reverb sends take care of which auxiliary send is going to be activated. So the only thing we have to do inside of Wwise for this to work is to check this checkbox game-defined auxiliary sense. In the context of your game, that basically means everything which is not, let's say, UI, voiceover, music might probably benefit from using those game-defined auxiliary sense. I'm quickly going to save the project and generate the sound banks, and then switch back to Unity. Here I've sort of connected our container to this house structure. And now we're going to use the so-called AkEnvironment component, which Wwise provides. You probably would link that to the corresponding structure inside of your game world. I'm just going to create a new game object to make the process a bit more clear. So we have reverb 1, and we'll add the AkEnvironment. It needs a box collider first. It doesn't even let me add it without that. That is a trigger and then AkEnvironment. We don't want to add a rigid body because that is on our player component, so our room reverb doesn't need the rigid body. For this AkEnvironment, we simply assign any aux bus we'd like to work with that, to use with that. So I'm gonna select reverb 1 Then I'm just going to duplicate the whole thing, create Reverb 2, and link that to the corresponding auxiliary bus. Then I'm quickly going to drag those trigger zones into our container and house structure, and then we'll proceed with further settings. Nice. So now we more or less have those two room trigger boxes assigned to the corresponding spaces. And now there's another interesting thing Audiokinetic/Wwise provides us with. So we're going to add a so-called AkEnvironmentPortal. I'm just gonna name the whole game object like that. And the interesting thing about that is I quickly need to drag it to the same position as well. So the interesting thing about that is that it basically allows us to have a crossfade between those two room environments around us. We don't even need to assign it because it basically detects when there are any AkEnvironment components overlapping with that AkEnvironment we just have to switch to the corresponding axis, which is Z in my case. Now it automatically detects those two reverbs. So if we now go into that scene, we can already hear the footsteps of our player character. And then if we walk into this container with the small reverb, and then the settings obviously are really extreme in my case. There are multiple ways how we could dial that down inside of Wwise. To quickly have a look, it's either a game-defined auxiliary sense and then we decrease the send amount, or we would probably as well change the properties of the reverb because, yeah, that already feels kind of weird. But if we now have a listen, yeah, already a lot less extreme. I'm gonna dial it back a little bit so we still have sort of a feeling for the space. Nice. Now getting to the second part I was yeah, let's say ranting about in my previous videos, is that FMOD handling of reverb is listener dependent. So depends on where the listener is standing in the scene, whether or not the reverb is active for any other emitter. This is not the case for Wwise AkEnvironment system. So if we load in the same Spanish voila gibberish I had in my previous tutorials, yeah, symbolized by the cube, you can still hear it reverberated inside the large room, even though me as a player, I'm standing somewhere completely else. Reverb is quite extreme, so I'm going to dial that down again. Nice. And to quickly demonstrate, if I pull that cube inside of the tunnel, and I'm going to increase the reverb amount a bit again. We then have that flangy small reverb again. And if we pull the cube completely out. No reverb. An important thing. Player is inside of the other reverb room. Our steps are reverberated, but the voice talking thing here isn't. Awesome. As I said, this is less to be thought of as a Wwise tutorial or something on how to set things up. There are wonderful tutorials out there from Game Audio Scott and as well Alessandro Fama. I'm hopefully pronouncing his name right, but he has a wonderful website where you can find out a lot about setting up Wwise and FMOD for Unity and Unreal. I just basically wanted to point out that I'm, let's say, even a bit disappointed on how well Wwise handles reverb over FMOD, because partly because of their pricing policy, I'm more into using FMOD and I really like the visual design and all that, but reverb isn't really FMOD's strength. So, thanks a lot for watching and hope to see you in the future. Bye!